Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at the descent into attrition. How exactly did a single, localized assassination back in the summer of 1914 manage to spiral completely out of control? We're going to break down the complex alliances, the sheer mechanized slaughter, and the ultimate fallout of World War I.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, the spark that ignited Europe. Then, trench warfare and industrial slaughter, followed by a truly global war. After that, we'll hit the mutiny and revolution of 1917, the final German gamble, and wrap up with a bitter, reshaped world. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The spark that ignited Europe and the domino effect of alliances.
So picture the scene just before June 28, 1914. Europe is basically a massive powder keg, split right down the middle into two rival camps, bound by fear and a whole lot of suspicion. On one side, you've got the Triple Entente, France, Britain, and Russia, and on the flip side, the Triple Alliance. That's Germany, who, by the way, was deeply terrified of being encircled, alongside Austro-Hungary and Italy. It was this incredibly fragile web of defensive pacts. If one nation gets threatened, the rest get pulled right in.
And here is exactly how fast that web tightened. First, the Archduke gets assassinated. Bam! Austro-Hungary attacks Serbia. Then Russia mobilizes. Germany, staring down a two-front war, enacts the famous Schlieffen Plan, hoping to knock out France quickly. But they had to violate Belgian neutrality to do it, and that was the final domino. It absolutely forced Britain's hand. Literally in a matter of weeks, millions of men were marching.
Moving on to Section 2, trench warfare and industrial slaughter. This is where the illusion of a short war is completely shattered.
After those rapid initial movements, both sides literally dug in across a staggering 350-mile front, stretching all the way from the English Channel down to Switzerland. The conflict fundamentally mutated into a war of attrition. By 1916, generals like Germany's von Falkenhayn totally abandoned the idea of swift victories for a really grim new strategy at Verdun. His goal? Simply bleed France white. It wasn't about gaining ground anymore. It was basically a mincing machine designed just to grind down the enemy's manpower.
To really wrap your head around the sheer horror of this industrialized warfare, consider this number: 57,000. That is the staggering number of British casualties suffered in just a few hours on the very first day of the Battle of the Somme. Long artillery bombardments totally failed to destroy enemy defenses, so waves of infantry were ordered to march directly into modern machine gun fire. It remains the absolute worst day in the history of the British Army. It really shows you the unimaginable human cost of these entrenched stalemates.
Now, to try and break that endless stalemate, a terrifying new arsenal was unleashed. Lethal poison gas debuted on the Western Front. We saw crude tanks roll out at the Somme and massive zeppelins bombing British civilians. Out at sea, U-boats were completely changing naval warfare, while up in the sky, synchronized machine guns, that interrupter gear, sparked the very first intense aerial combat.
Which brings us to Section 3, a truly global war, looking beyond the Western Front. See, the conflict expanded far beyond Europe's borders. Within the Ottoman Empire, which had joined the Central Powers, there was a grave civilian toll. The Ottoman Empire began the systematic deportation and murder of ethnic Armenians living within its borders. Over 1 million Armenians perished. Now, the Allies condemned this at the time as a crime against humanity, and relying strictly on the historical record from our sources, this remains an event that the Turkish government disputes to this very day.
Meanwhile, there was this massive economic and colonial struggle playing out. Britain used its mighty navy to blockade Germany, cutting off vital food supplies to starve their economy. Germany retaliated with those U-boats, famously sinking the passenger liner Lusitania. Across the globe, Japan honored its treaty with Britain and actually seized German colonies in Asia. And down in Africa, German Colonel von Lettow-Vorbeck waged a highly successful 4-year guerrilla war that tied down huge numbers of Allied troops. Honestly, from Lawrence of Arabia in the Middle East to naval battles off the coast of Chile, this was truly a world war.
All right, Section 4, 1917, Mutiny and Revolution, the breaking point of empires.
Put yourself in their shoes for a second. How do you break a 3-year stalemate when millions are dead, your resources are totally depleted, and morale has completely collapsed? Well, Germany's desperate gamble was to resume unrestricted submarine warfare. They hoped to cut off Britain's food and starve them out within 6 months, even if it meant sinking neutral American ships. To make things even more tense, the British intercepted the infamous Zimmermann telegram, which revealed Germany was actively encouraging Mexico to attack America. That massive miscalculation is what finally finally pushed U.S. President Woodrow Wilson to declare war on Germany.
But just as America prepared to enter, the Allies were in deep crisis. The Russian army collapsed amid the Bolshevik Revolution, and Russia ultimately signed an armistice with the Central Powers, exiting the war entirely. Over on the Western Front, French morale just shattered. We're talking whole units mutinying and outright refusing to participate in any more suicidal attacks. So the timing here was absolutely critical. Right as Russia left and France wavered, the United States formally entered the conflict, bringing vast, fresh resources and manpower to a completely exhausted Allied front.
Next up, Section 5, the final German gamble, the Spring Offensive of 1918.
With Russia out of the picture, German General Ludendorff knew he had a rapidly closing window to win the war on the Western Front before those American troops arrived in full force. So, in spring 1918, he launched an all-out offensive that actually caught the Allies off guard, driving them back for miles. But the German troops quickly became exhausted and outpaced their own supplies. By summer, 1 million U.S. soldiers were in France. The tide turned decisively on August 8th at Amiens, an event Ludendorff himself called the Black Day of the German army. That's when the Allies launched their 100 Days offensive. Supported by tanks and aircraft, they pushed the retreating Germans back and ultimately smashed right through the heavily reinforced Hindenburg Line.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, a bitter, reshaped world, the armistice and the aftermath as the Central Powers finally collapsed.
By this point, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, and Austro-Hungary had all signed armistices. Facing a totally hopeless military situation, a newly proclaimed German Republic agreed to a ceasefire in a railway carriage at Compiègne. This armistice was set to come in force at 11 a.m. on November 11, 1918. But tragically, the fighting continued until the very last possible moment. American Private Henry Gunther was killed charging a German machine gun at exactly 10:59 a.m. He lost his life just 60 seconds before peace was officially declared. It's such an incredibly intimate, tragic detail that perfectly captures the senseless loss of the previous 4 years.
And the macro scale of this destruction is it's hard to even comprehend. 9.5 million soldiers dead. That is 1 in every 8 who fought, never returning home. Add to that 7 million civilian deaths and another 21 million wounded. An entire generation completely decimated and huge areas of Europe left in total ruin.
Later, at the Paris Peace Conference, the resulting Treaty of Versailles completely redrew the global map. Germany was hit with harsh military restrictions, punishing war reparations, the loss of their colonies, and a deeply resented war guilt clause. Furthermore, 4 massive empires literally vanished into the ashes of history: the Austro-Hungarian, German, Ottoman, and Russian empires. Gone. In their place, the boundaries of Europe and the Middle East were carved up anew, birthing new states like Poland and Yugoslavia, though often still under European control.
All of which leaves us with a pretty crucial question to ponder. By dismantling old empires and imposing these harsh penalties, did the victors actually secure a lasting peace? Or did they simply plant the seeds for an even darker global conflict? Because when we look back at World War I, we aren't just looking at the tragedy of the trenches. We are looking directly at the flawed foundation that set the stage for the rest of the 20th century. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.